The night air over New York carried a quiet electricity, a rare blend of anticipation and elegance. Cameras flashed endlessly outside the Met Gala venue, each burst of light cutting through the fog that had settled over the city like an unfinished memory. Reporters shouted names, assistants adjusted gowns, and every face in the crowd seemed to wear a mask of control, perfection, and performance. But somewhere between that chaos and glamour, Keanu Reeves stood still. He wasn't late, but he wasn't rushing either. The way he moved had that quiet patience that the world often forgot still existed. His suit was black, simple, and without the glitter or exaggeration others wore. He looked like a man who didn't belong to the noise, but was somehow the reason people paused to listen. Beside him, Sandra Bullock adjusted her shawl, her eyes scanning the endless red carpet ahead. The golden light reflected off her dress like melted sunlight, soft but commanding. She smiled politely for the cameras, yet her expression carried something deeper, something that belonged to another place, another time. They had walked carpets before, together and apart. But tonight felt different. Their reunion had been whispered about for months, after years of quiet distance. Hollywood called it a nostalgic pairing. Fans called it a dream revived. Yet neither of them cared much about names. For them, this night wasn't about fashion. It was about a promise that had been made years ago, long before fame turned their lives into headlines. As they took their first steps onto the carpet, the crowd erupted in flashes. Photographers shouted, "Keanu, over here! Sandra, turn your head this way. Look at each other. Perfect." And they did. For a moment their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A soft recognition, a quiet apology, a shared memory. And though thousands of people stood around them, it felt like no one else existed. Inside the Met, the atmosphere shifted. Chandeliers flickered softly above hundreds of guests, their laughter echoing beneath ceilings painted like constellations. Keanu and Sandra moved through the crowd with the ease of old souls, greeting familiar faces and smiling at strangers who thought they knew them. Their conversation was light, careful, almost rehearsed. But beneath each word something lingered, a question, a truth, a secret. When they reached their table, a woman from the event staff handed them small cards sealed in gold wax. "These are from the curator," she said politely. "They'll make sense later tonight." Keanu turned the card over in his hand. No name, no logo, just a small symbol, a folded paper crane. Sandra noticed his hesitation. "Strange theme," she whispered, half smiling, but her voice had a tremor he didn't miss. The gala continued like a dream, stitched together by flashes of laughter, music, and artificial grace. But between conversations, Keanu kept noticing small details others ignored. The way the candles near their table flickered more than the others. The way the lights dimmed slightly when certain guests passed. The way the staff seemed to look at him and Sandra with quiet curiosity. When the dinner began, the host, a renowned art collector, rose to speak. "Tonight," he announced, "we honor not only art but the stories behind it, the ones that changed the lives of those who carried them." As he spoke, a massive screen behind him began to glow. It displayed photographs of artists, actors, and humanitarians who had used their fame for kindness. Then the next image appeared, and the room went silent. It was a photograph of Keanu and Sandra. Not from a movie set, not from a red carpet. It was an old photo, taken more than 2 decades ago, of the two of them standing under a dim hospital light, holding the hand of a young girl. Sandra froze. Keanu's fingers tightened slightly around his glass. The audience watched in confusion as the host continued. "Few people know this story. It happened long before their names became symbols of grace. But tonight, we reveal the truth behind that moment." Keanu glanced at Sandra. She looked pale, her eyes reflecting the screen like mirrors of the past. He whispered, "They weren't supposed to know." She shook her head slightly, whispering back, "I didn't tell anyone." The screen faded to black. The silence deepened. Then came the words, written in white light across the screen, the promise that saved a life. A soft murmur spread across the room. The host smiled faintly, clearly unaware of the storm he had just unleashed. "And so," he said, "we present tonight's theme, Secrets of the Heart, and the story of those who chose compassion over fame." The applause was gentle but uncertain. Keanu's mind was already racing. He remembered that night vividly. The hospital, the rain, the fear in the little girl's eyes, the quiet agreement between him and Sandra never to speak of it again. That night had changed them both forever. But now, someone else knew, and they had chosen tonight, of all nights, to reveal it. Sandra leaned closer. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Do you think it's her?" Keanu didn't answer. His gaze was fixed on the folded paper crane still lying beside his plate. Before he could respond, one of the gala staff approached. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Bullock, the curator would like to speak with you privately." Keanu stood slowly. "Where?" he asked. "In the East Gallery," she replied. "She said it concerns the exhibit dedicated to you both." The words felt heavy. "Exhibit dedicated to us?" Sandra whispered, as they followed the woman through the corridor lined with glass sculptures and dim golden light. "We didn't approve anything like that." Keanu nodded. "Exactly." The hallway grew quieter with each step, the noise of the main hall fading until only their footsteps remained. The air was colder here, sharper. The walls were lined with photographs, moments of kindness, resilience, loss, and recovery. Each image told a story of people who had made a difference without seeking credit. But then they reached the end of the hall and stopped. Before them stood a single photograph encased in glass. It was their picture from that night again, only this time enlarged and framed with a handwritten note beneath it. It read, "For the ones who kept their promise when no one else believed." Sandra covered her mouth. "Keanu, this is the same message she sent me before she disappeared." He turned sharply. "You mean—" But she nodded before he could finish. "Yes, the girl from the hospital." A deep silence filled the space between them. The air seemed to hum faintly, like the world itself had paused to listen. "She's alive," Sandra whispered. "And she's here." Keanu stepped closer to the photograph, his reflection merging with hers in the glass. Somewhere behind the frame, a soft click echoed, like a camera shutter. He turned around quickly, but the corridor was empty. And yet, on the floor behind them lay a single folded paper crane, wet, fresh, and marked with red ink. He picked it up carefully. On its wing, written in tiny handwriting, were 5 words that made his pulse stop. "I remember your promise, Keanu." Sandra stared at it, her eyes wide. "How could she know we'd be here?" Keanu exhaled slowly. "Because," he said, his voice low, "she's the reason we were invited." The lights above flickered again, once, twice, before the entire hallway went dark. A single spotlight remained, illuminating the photograph on the wall and beneath it. Their reflections slowly faded, until only the paper crane remained, glowing faintly in the dim light. Then, a soft voice echoed from somewhere in the darkness. "You both forgot the truth." The screen of light above the photograph flickered, revealing a new image, grainy and old. It showed the same hospital room from years ago, but this time, there was a third figure standing in the corner, and neither of them remembered ever seeing her there before. The screen went black again, and the sound of a heart monitor began to echo faintly through the hall. The girl from the photograph. The hall was completely dark except for that single flickering light above the photograph. The soft hum of the crowd outside had vanished. It felt as if the entire gala had been swallowed by silence. Keanu and Sandra stood frozen, staring at the dim glow reflecting off the glass. The faint sound of the heart monitor continued, steady but haunting. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than before, like a breath the world refused to release. Sandra whispered, "This isn't part of the event, is it?" Keanu didn't answer. He stepped closer to the frame again, his eyes scanning the photograph carefully, and that's when he saw it. The corner of the image wasn't static anymore. It was moving. The girl in the bed blinked. Sandra gasped quietly, "It's playing a video." The still image had come alive, faintly animated like an old recording rediscovered after years of dust. The girl was speaking softly, her voice trembling through the static. "You said you'd come back," she whispered. Keanu's heartbeat quickened. Sandra covered her mouth, tears already forming in her eyes. "It's her," she murmured. "My God, it's really her." The young girl, no older than 13, lay in a hospital bed surrounded by faded walls and beeping machines. She looked weak, but her eyes burned with quiet strength. "You told me stories that night," the girl continued, "about hope, about not giving up. And you said that if I survived, I'd find you again. Do you remember that?" Keanu whispered under his breath, "I do." The video crackled, her voice fading in and out. "You kept your promise." But someone didn't. Then the image cut out. The room was silent again, except for Sandra's quiet breathing. She took a slow step back, her voice shaking. This can't be real." "It was 20 years ago. She couldn't have, unless," Keanu interrupted softly, "she never left." They turned as the door behind them creaked open. The event staff member who had guided them there stood in the doorway, her expression uneasy. "Mr. Reeves, Miss Bullock," she said quietly. "The curator will see you now." Her tone was different this time, less formal, more urgent. Keanu nodded slowly. "Where?" "The East Garden. Please follow me." They followed her down another narrow corridor that led toward a glass door. Beyond it, faint garden lights shimmered like distant fireflies. The air was cooler now, and the sound of rain began to fall softly outside. As they stepped into the garden, Sandra whispered, "It's just like that night." Keanu remembered it too. The sound of rain on hospital windows, the smell of damp soil, the heavy air filled with fear and fragile hope. A figure stood at the far end of the garden, near a sculpture covered with white cloth. She was small, her back turned to them, her hands clasped in front of her. "Are you the curator?" Keanu called gently. The woman didn't turn around. Instead, she said quietly, "I was once, before I became something else." The rain intensified slightly. The air shimmered with cold mist. Sandra's voice trembled. "Who are you?" The woman slowly turned. She was young, too young to have been part of the gala's staff. Her face was pale, framed by dark hair tied loosely behind her. But it wasn't her youth that unsettled them. It was her eyes. They were familiar. Hauntingly familiar. "You don't remember me," she said softly. "But I remember you." Sandra took a hesitant step forward. "You were the girl." "From the hospital?" The young woman nodded faintly. "You promised me something that night. You said if I ever felt alone again, I could find you. And now I have." Keanu exhaled slowly, his expression calm but filled with concern. "We never forgot that night," he said gently. "We just didn't know where you went." The woman smiled faintly, but it wasn't a happy smile. "That's because someone made sure you wouldn't." Her words hung heavy in the air. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance. Sandra's voice was quiet. "What do you mean?" The woman stepped closer. "The hospital you came to wasn't what you thought it was. It was a private research facility, disguised as a children's ward. I wasn't just sick. I was part of something else." Keanu's brow furrowed. "Something else?" She nodded. "An experiment funded by one of the event's sponsors, the same people hosting tonight." The garden lights flickered again. Sandra felt a chill crawl up her spine. "Why us?" she asked. "Why bring this to us now?" "Because," the woman said softly, "the truth about that night didn't end when I survived." It began. Keanu took a deep breath. "What truth?" The woman looked at him directly. "That someone close to you both made a deal to keep it quiet, to bury everything. But now, they want it uncovered, for reasons that have nothing to do with kindness." The wind picked up, shaking the branches overhead. Keanu's expression darkened. "Who?" The woman looked past them toward the glass building behind. "They're in there right now, watching us." Sandra turned around. Through the glass, she saw the faint outline of a figure standing near the gallery entrance. The shape was blurred by rain and light, but unmistakably human. Keanu stepped forward instinctively, his protective instinct clear. "Stay here," he told the woman. He walked toward the glass door, but before he could reach it, every light in the garden went out. A sudden darkness consumed everything. Only the sound of rain remained. Then, one by one, small lanterns along the path began to glow, not electric, but candle-lit. They formed a trail leading deeper into the garden. From the darkness, a familiar voice spoke. "It's time you remembered what you buried." Keanu froze. That voice, low, calm, unmistakable. It belonged to someone he hadn't seen in years. Sandra recognized it too. "No," she whispered. "It can't be him." The lanterns flickered brighter, revealing a man standing at the end of the path. Tall, composed, wearing a black raincoat, his face half hidden under the brim of a hat. "Hello, Keanu," the man said softly. "Hello, Sandra." Keanu's jaw tightened. "What are you doing here?" The man smiled faintly. "Making sure the truth doesn't destroy the wrong people." The woman from the hospital stepped forward from the shadows. "You lied to me," she said, her voice breaking. "You said they didn't know." "That it was over." The man sighed quietly. "It was over." "Until tonight." Sandra's voice trembled. "What are you talking about?" The man took off his hat. His face was older, worn by years of secrets and silence. "The hospital project was mine," he said quietly. "And the promise you made that night, it was never supposed to reach her." Keanu stared at him in disbelief. "You used us?" "I protected you," the man replied. "The truth would have destroyed your careers, your lives. I made sure the world never saw what really happened that night." The young woman's voice rose sharply. "You didn't protect anyone. You erased me!" A bolt of lightning split the sky, flooding the garden in white light for a second. When it faded, she was standing right in front of him, trembling with fury and pain. Keanu stepped between them. "Stop," he said calmly. "No one's here to fight. We just want answers." She looked at him, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "Answers won't change what you forgot." Keanu's voice softened. "Then remind us." She turned slowly toward the sculpture, still covered by the white cloth. "You said you'd never forget me," she whispered. "So look now and tell me if you really remember." She pulled the cloth away. Underneath it stood a life-sized sculpture of a hospital bed. On it lay a child's figure made entirely of glass shards, each piece catching the dim candlelight. Beneath the sculpture, etched in steel, were the words, "The promise," that broke them. Sandra took a step back, her breath catching. "Broke us?" she whispered. The young woman's eyes glistened. "Because you didn't save me that night. You saved someone else." Keanu's heartbeat stopped for a moment. The world seemed to tilt slightly. "What do you mean?" She met his eyes. "You think I was the girl you helped." She pointed to the sculpture. "But I wasn't her." Sandra's hands trembled as she whispered, "Then who are you?" The woman's voice lowered, heavy with emotion. "I'm the one who was left behind." The rain poured harder. Thunder roared. The lanterns flickered violently before dying one by one. And in the darkness, her last words lingered like a ghost. "And now, I've come to return what you forgot." The last lantern went out. The return of memory for a long moment. There was nothing but the sound of rain falling against stone. The garden lights had died completely, and the only illumination came from the faint reflection of the gala hall far behind them. Keanu stood perfectly still, listening, not to the rain, but to the silence between each drop. It was the same kind of silence he had felt once before, years ago, in a hospital room where the truth had been too heavy for words. Sandra's voice was small when it finally came. "She said she wasn't the one we saved." Keanu turned slowly, his face half lit by the distant glow of the Met building. "Then who was she?" A faint sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows. The young woman, the one who claimed to have been left behind, was standing near the sculpture again. Rain soaked her hair, but she didn't move to cover herself. She looked fragile, but her voice was sharp and certain. "The girl you saved wasn't me," she said softly. "You think I was the one on that hospital bed, but that's what they wanted you to believe." Sandra's brow furrowed. "Then why did we see your face? Why was that picture shown tonight?" The woman stepped closer, her expression flickering between pain and fury. "Because they replaced the real girl's face with mine." Keanu's breath caught. "What?" "After you both left that night," she continued. Someone edited the footage. The truth was rewritten. The girl who actually survived disappeared. I was kept there for another 2 years, under a different name, under a different reason. Sandra's voice cracked slightly. But why? The woman's eyes met hers. Because she wasn't supposed to live. And I wasn't supposed to remember. Lightning flashed, revealing the garden's soaked marble walls and trembling trees. The rain poured harder, but none of them moved. The man in the black coat, the one who had confessed to leading the old project, watched them from a few steps away, silent, unmoving, like a judge waiting for the guilty to speak first. Keanu faced him. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew what they were doing." The man exhaled deeply. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. The research was meant to help children heal faster, to use emotional memory as therapy. She wasn't supposed to suffer." Sandra took a step forward. "You manipulated us. You brought us into that hospital under the idea of helping a sick girl. But you were testing how our empathy could influence her recovery." The man didn't deny it. "We believed emotional resonance had healing power. Real connection could alter biology. You two were perfect for the study, authentic, compassionate, unaffected by fame. You didn't know you were part of it. That's why it worked." Keanu's jaw tightened. "Worked? You call that working?" The man's expression broke for a second. "She survived, didn't she?" The young woman's voice cut through the rain like glass. "No, she didn't." The words froze the air around them. Keanu turned slowly toward her. "You mean—" She nodded. "The real girl died the same night you left." Sandra's hand trembled as she covered her mouth. "No." "And they replaced her," the woman continued, her voice hollow. "They found me in the same ward. I looked similar enough. I was quiet, obedient, forgettable. They told me I had survived. They showed me photos of you two beside my bed. They made me believe I was her." Keanu's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because they needed a story," she said. "The donors, the press, the sponsors, all needed proof that their program worked. And you two, Hollywood's golden pair of compassion, became their living evidence." The man in the coat looked away, guilt carving deep lines across his face. "It was never supposed to become this. After the experiment was shut down, I tried to find her. But she had already vanished." The young woman laughed bitterly. "I didn't vanish. I was erased." Sandra's eyes glistened with tears. "And tonight you came back to expose it." The woman nodded faintly. "They thought I'd stay silent forever. But when I saw the Met Gala theme this year, Secrets of the Heart, I knew it was time." She turned toward Keanu, her expression softening. "You were the only ones who ever treated me like a person. You held my hand that night. You told me that kindness can outlive pain. I've remembered those words every single day since. And when I saw your names on the guest list, I knew this was the moment to tell you the truth." Keanu's voice was quiet, almost breaking. "We would have found you if we had known you couldn't have," she said gently. "They made sure you wouldn't remember me." Rain ran down Keanu's face, but it wasn't clear if it was rain alone. "What do you mean?" "They erased your memory of me," she whispered. "Not completely. Just fragments, dreams, flashes. They used the same technique on you that they used on me. It's why you always felt that something about that night was missing." Sandra's knees almost gave out. "No, that's not possible." The man spoke again, his voice lower now. "It is. We had experimental neurotherapy at the time, part of the same research. It was supposed to ease trauma. I ordered it used on them. To protect them." Keanu stared at him, disbelief turning to quiet rage. "You stole our memories and called it protection." "You were suffering," the man replied. "You blamed yourselves for her death. You couldn't sleep. The guilt was eating you alive. I had to—" "You had no right," Sandra interrupted, her voice shaking but fierce. "You took away our truth, our pain, our connection to her. You played God with memory." The young woman watched silently, her expression unreadable. Then softly, she said, "That's why I brought you both here tonight. Because memories aren't gone. They just hide in the places where pain still lives." She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, another paper crane, this one older and worn. She placed it in Keanu's hand. "You made this," she whispered, "that night in the hospital. You told me that if I ever felt scared, I should hold on to it and remember that kindness doesn't die. Keanu looked at the crane, its paper faded, edges torn but intact. Something inside him shifted. A flicker of warmth and sorrow mixed together. Images began to surface, flashes of the hospital room, a child's trembling hand, Sandra's quiet sobs, and his own voice whispering promises he had long forgotten. He whispered, "I remember." The rain seemed to soften around them as if the world itself exhaled. But then, from behind the trees, the sound of footsteps echoed again. Heavier, quicker, deliberate. A man in a dark suit appeared, holding an umbrella. His presence was sharp, official, cold. He approached the man in the black coat and spoke quietly. "We have to leave. The press is already asking questions." The man turned toward Keanu and Sandra. "You have no idea what you've just reopened. These people, they won't let this story surface. Walk away, both of you." Keanu's expression hardened. "We've walked away long enough." The man gave him a long, sorrowful look. "Then you'll both regret it." He turned and left, the rain swallowing his footsteps. The younger woman stood in silence, watching him disappear into the darkness. Sandra turned to Keanu, her voice low. "What now?" Keanu looked down at the paper crane in his hand. "Now we find out what really happened that night, who the real girl was, and why they wanted us to forget her." The young woman nodded slowly. "There's one more thing you should see." "What?" Keanu asked. She looked toward the building again. "The final exhibit. It's hidden beneath the gallery. It's where they keep the original footage." "Footage of what?" Sandra asked. The woman met her eyes. "The night she died." The wind howled through the garden again, scattering petals and rain across the ground. In the distance, the Met Gala music had resumed, violins and polite laughter echoing faintly, like a cruel contrast to the storm outside. Keanu tightened his grip on the paper crane. "Then that's where we go." The young woman hesitated, her gaze flicking toward the dark corridor that led beneath the gallery. "Once you see it, there's no going back." Keanu's voice was calm. "We already crossed that line," and with that, he stepped forward, disappearing into the corridor's shadow. Sandra followed without hesitation. The young woman looked back once, more toward the empty garden, toward the sculpture of glass and rain, then whispered quietly to herself, "It's time." She followed them into the darkness. The storm above them raged on, washing away footprints, folding secrets back into the soil. Beneath the Met, an old door waited, and behind it, the truth neither of them were prepared to face. The room beneath, the corridor beneath the Met, was narrow and cold, lined with concrete and faint traces of forgotten art crates. Drops of rainwater dripped from the ceiling, echoing like slow heartbeats. The walls smelled faintly of dust, iron, and old paint, a scent that didn't belong in a place meant for beauty. Keanu walked ahead, the small paper crane still in his hand. Every time he looked at it, another memory surfaced, faint and uncertain, like a voice calling through fog. Sandra followed close behind, her hand occasionally brushing against the wall for balance. Her heels clicked softly on the wet floor, the sound almost timid in the dark. "How far does this go?" she asked quietly. The young woman behind them, the one who had revealed the truth, replied in a near whisper. "It connects to the old archives. Before the renovation, this was part of the museum's restoration wing. They closed it after the accident." "What accident?" Sandra asked. "The one that killed her," the woman said. Keanu stopped walking. "You mean the real girl?" She nodded slowly. "They said it was electrical failure, but I think it was something else." The flickering light bulbs above them buzzed faintly, throwing shifting shadows across the walls. Keanu glanced around. "This place isn't just a storage tunnel. It's been used recently. Indeed, there were footprints in the thin layer of dust, fresh ones. Small equipment crates stood stacked near the wall, cables running toward a distant door where faint blue light leaked through the gap. As they approached the door, Sandra felt her chest tighten. "What if they're waiting for us?" Keanu looked back at her, his expression calm but resolute. "Then we face them." The young woman reached for the door handle but paused. Her voice softened. "Before we go in, you should know something." Keanu turned toward her. "What is it?" "The footage. she said slowly. It doesn't just show what happened that night. It shows why it happened, Sandra frowned. What do you mean? The experiment wasn't just about emotional healing, she continued. They wanted to prove that empathy could change the body's chemistry, literally rewrite pain into peace. But they needed trauma to test it. They needed loss. The silence after her words was heavy. Keanu's hand tightened around the crane. So they created pain, she nodded faintly. Yes. He opened the door. The room beyond was cold, bathed in a dim blue light from an old monitor at the far end. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with tapes, drives, and paper folders sealed in plastic. The air was stale, as if the room hadn't been opened in years. On the desk near the monitor sat a small metal box marked with faded letters. Archive. Patient 47B. The young woman's voice trembled. That was her code, Sandra whispered. The real girl. Keanu brushed the dust off the box, his fingers trembling slightly. Inside were 3 items, a tape labeled Session Final, a hospital ID badge with a child's face, and a folded note. He lifted the note carefully. The paper was thin and yellowed with age. On it were just a few words written in shaky handwriting, for the ones who stayed when others ran. Sandra felt tears forming. She wrote that? The young woman shook her head. No. That's your handwriting, Keanu. His eyes widened. What? You wrote it that night, she said softly. Right before they took you both upstairs. They made you write goodbye letters to ease your guilt. You just never remembered. Keanu looked down at the note, his reflection trembling in the paper's faint shine. They turned memory into performance. The young woman pressed a button on the old monitor. Static filled the screen. The image flickered, distorted, then slowly resolved into the faded view of a hospital room. It was late at night, rain against the window, machines beeping faintly. And there, on the bed, lay the real girl. Pale, thin, barely breathing. Beside her sat Sandra, holding her hand, whispering something softly. Then Keanu appeared in the frame, entering quietly with a small paper crane in his hand. Sandra gasped. That's the crane you're holding. On screen, Keanu knelt beside the bed. His voice was calm, tender, breaking slightly. You're brave, he whispered. You just need to rest. When you wake up, we'll take you to see the sunrise. Okay? The girl smiled faintly. Promise? Promise. The image flickered again. The girl closed her eyes. Sandra on screen whispered something inaudible, tears falling silently. Then alarms began to beep. Doctors rushed in. The camera trembled, and through the chaos, one detail stood out. A nurse unplugging a cable deliberately. Sandra's real voice broke the silence. She didn't die naturally. Keanu leaned closer. Someone stopped her heart. The young woman's hands shook as she froze the frame. That nurse, she whispered. I know her. Who is she? Keanu asked. The woman hesitated. She's here tonight. She's one of the event coordinators. Sandra stepped back. You're saying she's part of the gala? Yes, the woman said. She's the reason I was invited. She wanted me to see this, but she also wanted to control how it's told. Keanu looked toward the hallway. We need to find her before she finds us. But before they could move, the lights in the archive flickered violently. The monitor turned off by itself. The door behind them slammed shut. The young woman's voice rose. They know we're here. Keanu moved toward the door, pulling hard at the handle. It didn't budge. The air grew colder, heavier. From the speaker of the dead monitor came a faint voice, distorted, low but unmistakable. It was the nurse. You shouldn't have opened that box, she said. You don't understand what that promise cost, Sandra shouted. What did you do to her? The voice chuckled faintly. I did what I was told. But you. You were the ones who made her believe she could survive. You gave her hope, and that's what killed her. Keanu's voice hardened. We gave her kindness. You took it away. Kindness? The voice replied. You don't know what kindness does to desperate people. It makes them fight against reality. It makes them believe pain is optional. The static deepened. The light dimmed again. Then, on the wall opposite the monitor, a projector flickered to life, showing new footage. It wasn't from the hospital this time. It was from earlier that night, the Met Gala. The video showed the young woman standing alone in the gallery before the event began, speaking to someone hidden behind the camera. She said, "They think they can control the truth, but tonight they'll remember what they buried." The voice behind the camera replied, "And if they don't?" She smiled faintly. "Then I'll make them." The video ended abruptly. Sandra turned toward her, shocked. "You knew this would happen." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't plan for it to go this far. I just wanted you to see the truth. I wanted closure. I didn't know they'd still be watching." Keanu's voice softened. "Who are they?" "The sponsors," she said quietly. "The same organization that funded the experiment. They've been hiding the results for years, using stories like yours as cover. And you brought us here to expose them." "Yes, but now they know we're trying." The monitor buzzed again, flashing white for a second, revealing one final line of text before shutting off completely. "The memory cannot stay buried. It demands to be seen." Keanu looked at the young woman. "What happens if we make this public?" Her voice was calm now, almost peaceful. "Then everything changes. For you, for them, for me. The world will see what compassion can cost and what silence can create." The lights came back on suddenly. The door unlocked by itself. Keanu stepped out first, scanning the corridor. "They're letting us go," he murmured. Sandra followed him, her eyes wet. "No, they're watching what we'll do next." The young woman stayed behind for a moment, her eyes fixed on the flickering monitor. She whispered quietly, "Forgive me." Then she turned and followed them out. As they reached the end of the corridor, they emerged into a quiet service hallway leading back to the main floor. Music from the gala echoed faintly above, violins, applause, the sound of normalcy returning. Keanu stopped at the base of the stairs. "We can't just walk away." Sandra looked at him, understanding the weight of his tone. "Then we don't." The young woman hesitated. "There's one more thing you should see before you decide." "Something upstairs. The final part of the exhibit." "What is it?" Keanu asked. She looked up toward the light spilling through the stairwell. "It's the last thing she left behind. The message she meant for you both." Keanu exchanged a glance with Sandra, then nodded. They started climbing the stairs together, step by step, back toward the glowing world above, unaware that every movement was being watched on a hidden camera deep inside the archive room they had just left. And as they disappeared into the light, the monitor in the darkness flickered one last time, showing the face of the real girl, smiling faintly, whispering a single word: "Remember." The truth above the staircase back to the main floor seemed endless. Every step echoed with the ghosts of what they had just seen below. Sandra's breathing was uneven, her fingers grazing the cold rail for balance. Keanu moved ahead silently, his posture steady but heavy, like a man walking toward a truth he had feared all his life. Behind them, the young woman climbed slowly, her wet hair sticking to her face, her eyes reflecting the faint light from above. When they finally reached the top, the contrast was jarring. The Met Gala had resumed in full splendor. Laughter floated through the air. Champagne glasses clinked and music swelled beneath chandeliers that sparkled like constellations. No one knew, or perhaps no one cared, that beneath their polished shoes lay a room filled with the remains of buried pain. Keanu and Sandra stood by the edge of the staircase for a moment, letting the brightness sting their eyes. Sandra whispered, "How can everything look so normal when everything isn't?" Keanu looked around slowly. "Because that's what they do. They make illusion look like truth." The young woman stepped beside them, her gaze fixed on the far end of the hall. "The final exhibit is that way," she said softly. "In the West Wing. They called it the Heart of Compassion installation. But it's not what it sounds like." Sandra's voice trembled. "What did they do?" "They built an art piece out of what they took from all of us," she said. "Memories, faces, emotions. Everything they erased from the experiment, they turned it into art." As they walked through the crowd, heads began to turn. Cameras flashed again, but this time, the attention felt different. It wasn't excitement. It was curiosity, confusion, unease. Whispers rippled through the room. Something about their wet clothes, their grave expressions, the silent intensity in their eyes made them seem out of place in the glittering chaos. A reporter called out, "Keanu, is everything all right?" He didn't answer. As they passed through the corridor toward the West Wing, the sound of the orchestra faded. In its place came a low hum, almost like a heartbeat pulsing through the walls. The hallway grew darker, lit only by soft amber light. At the end stood two tall wooden doors engraved with delicate carvings of folded cranes. The young woman stopped. "This is it." Keanu glanced at her. "How do you know what's inside?" "Because I helped them build it," she said quietly. Sandra froze. "You what?" The young woman looked down. "They told me it was for healing. They said it would help people remember the beauty of empathy. They never told me they were using our memories to do it. They used my likeness, your words, her story, everything." She placed her hand on the door. "Once we open this, you'll see why they brought us here." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then let's end it." The doors creaked as they opened. Inside was a vast, circular room filled with suspended glass panels, hundreds of them, each one glowing faintly from within. On every panel, fragments of moments appeared, faces, laughter, tears, gestures of kindness. They floated like captured memories trapped between worlds. In the center stood a large sculpture made of intertwined hands, some real casts, some carved from crystal. Beneath it, projected on the floor, were words written in soft light. "Compassion is memory preserved." Sandra's voice broke. "This is beautiful." "And horrifying." Keanu stepped forward, scanning the glowing panels. He saw flashes of their faces, him holding the little girl's hand, Sandra singing softly beside her bed, a doctor's shadow crossing the room. Each fragment felt alive, pulsing faintly with emotion. "They turned our memories into spectacle," he murmured. The young woman walked to the center of the sculpture. "This installation runs on neural recordings," she said. "The ones taken from you after that night. They extracted emotional frequencies from your memories and encoded them into light." Sandra shook her head. "They stole our grief and turned it into entertainment." The young woman touched one of the glass panels gently. The image within flickered, revealing the little girl again, smiling weakly from her hospital bed. Keanu whispered, "She's still here?" "Yes," the woman replied. "The system loops fragments of her consciousness through the installation. Her emotional imprint powers the entire display." Sandra stared at her in disbelief. "You're saying they trapped her inside this?" "Not her body, not her voice, just what she felt when she died, the love she received, the promise she believed in." "That's what you're seeing." Keanu's throat tightened. "And we've been walking above this for years, never knowing." The young woman nodded. "And tonight, they plan to unveil it to the world as a tribute. To you two. To your kindness. To your legacy of compassion. They wanted your reaction on camera," Sandra whispered. "They wanted us to bless their lie." "Yes," the woman said. "But if you touch that sculpture now, the truth will broadcast instead." Keanu frowned. "What do you mean?" "The system is designed to record live emotional responses. It's wired into the building's media feed. If you connect to it, it'll show your real memories, the ones they erased." Sandra's eyes widened. "You mean we can get them back?" The young woman hesitated. "Maybe. But if you do, it'll also go public. The world will see everything. Her death, the experiment, the manipulation. You'll lose your privacy forever, and so will I." Keanu looked at Sandra. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "What do you want to do?" he asked. She took a deep breath. "I want the truth. Even if it hurts," he nodded once firmly. "Then we do it." They stepped closer to the sculpture. The glow brightened as they approached, as if it could sense recognition. Sandra reached out first, her fingertips brushing the cool surface of the crystal hands. Keanu followed, placing his palm beside hers. The moment their skin touched the sculpture, the room erupted in light. Every glass panel around them flared alive at once, flashing scenes like a storm of memories breaking free. The air filled with sound. Laughter, sobs, promises, screams, apologies, whispers of love and loss. Sandra gasped, covering her mouth. It's all coming back. Keanu's eyes filled with tears as memories crashed through him. The hospital, the rain, the girl's last smile, the moment they were led away by doctors who promised she'd live, the empty room when they returned, but there was more. Flashes they had never seen before, the nurse unplugging the machine, the man in the coat watching from the hallway, and then, one final image, a small figure standing in the rain outside the hospital, clutching the paper crane. Not the real girl, the young woman. She had been there that night, hiding, watching, unseen. She wasn't part of the experiment yet. She was just another patient who witnessed everything. Sandra turned toward her, realization flooding her face. You saw it all. The woman nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I saw her die. I saw them replace her. I saw you both leave with hope still in your eyes. I thought, if I became her, maybe her story would live. Keanu stepped closer, his voice breaking. You carried her promise. I tried, she whispered. But it wasn't mine to carry. It was yours. The light grew brighter, surrounding them in gold and white. On every screen, the girl's voice echoed, soft, distant, but clear now. You kept your promise, even when you forgot it. The crowd outside began to gather near the gallery entrance, drawn by the blinding glow spilling from the doors. Reporters whispered. Cameras lifted, lenses focusing on the impossible light radiating from within. Inside, Keanu and Sandra stood hand in hand, their reflections scattered across hundreds of shining memories. The young woman stepped back, her figure slowly fading into the brightness. What's happening to you? Sandra cried. The woman smiled faintly through her tears. I was never supposed to exist this long. When you reactivated the memory, you gave her peace. And that means I can rest too. Keanu shook his head, reaching out. No, you're real. You don't have to disappear, she smiled gently. You gave her love. That's all she ever wanted. Now she's free. The light engulfed everything. And then, silence. When it faded, the room was empty except for Keanu and Sandra. The sculpture no longer glowed. The panels had gone dark. On the floor where the woman had stood lay a single paper crane, dry, untouched by the storm. Outside the doors, people began to rush in, shouting questions, recording, trying to capture what they couldn't understand. But Keanu and Sandra stood still, surrounded by the quiet echo of what once was. Sandra whispered, What do we tell them? Keanu looked at the crane in his hand. We tell them the truth. Finally, he placed the crane gently at the base of the sculpture. Its shadow formed a perfect heart on the marble floor under the last ray of golden light. And somewhere, faintly, a child's laughter echoed one last time, soft, distant, eternal. The promise remembered, the crowd outside the exhibit room surged forward, drawn by curiosity and confusion. Security guards struggled to contain them. Flashes from cameras lit up the Golden Hall, and questions rippled through the chaos like breaking waves. What happened inside? Was it part of the performance? Why are they crying? But Keanu and Sandra didn't answer. They walked slowly out of the West Wing, their faces calm but distant, as if they had just stepped out of a dream too heavy for words. The music had stopped again. The chandeliers still glowed, but their light felt colder now, more honest, stripped of illusion. People parted silently as the two passed. Even those who didn't know what had occurred could feel something sacred had been touched. The young woman's absence was a ghost in the air, something everyone felt but couldn't name. Keanu paused at the top of the grand staircase and turned back. The door to the West Wing stood open, and from inside, a faint glimmer still pulsed, like a dying heartbeat refusing to fade. Sandra joined him, her voice soft. It's over, isn't it? Keanu looked at the crane in his palm. No, now it begins. They descended the stairs slowly, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the hall. Reporters swarmed forward, microphones raised, flashes exploding. Keanu, what was that light? Sandra, are you all right? Is this a protest? A message? Sandra stopped for a moment, her voice shaking but steady. It was a truth that needed to be seen. And that was all she said. Outside, the storm had ended. The city glistened beneath a blanket of rain. Streetlights shimmered on wet pavement and the night smelled like renewal. Keanu stepped into the rain without hesitation, lifting his face toward the sky as if to wash away everything false that had ever been attached to his name. Sandra stood beside him, silent for a while. Then she whispered, "What happens now?" He turned to her, eyes soft, tired, and peaceful. "We tell her story. Not the one they built, but the one she lived. And if they try to stop us?" she asked. "They can't stop what's already remembered." The following days were unlike anything they had known. Footage of the Met Gala leaked across every major network. The light eruption, the recordings, the sculpture, it all became a global mystery. Millions debated what had happened. Was it art? A spiritual event? A secret confession? But Keanu and Sandra stayed quiet for 3 days. No interviews, no statements, just silence. On the 4th day, they appeared together on a small, independent broadcast. No luxury set, no makeup, no lights. Just them sitting side by side at a wooden table. Their faces were calm, but marked by something deeper than fatigue. Clarity. Keanu spoke first. His voice was low and steady. "Years ago, we made a promise to a little girl we met in a hospital. We told her she wasn't alone. We told her that kindness can heal even what medicine cannot. That night changed us. But we were made to forget it. Her name was never shared with the world. Her story was rewritten. Tonight we want to give it back." Sandra continued softly. "The world celebrates beauty, fame, and success. But sometimes, the truest moments happen in silence when no one is watching. She taught us that compassion is not about being seen. It's about seeing." They shared fragments of what they remembered. The girl's courage, her laughter, the promise that bound them. They never mentioned the experiment, the organization, or the names involved. They didn't need to. The emotion in their voices told the truth more powerfully than any accusation. Within hours, their words spread across the world. News outlets called it the Met Revelation. Others called it the memory of kindness. Hashtags flooded every platform. But more important than the headlines were the letters that began arriving, thousands of them, from strangers, doctors, parents, nurses, people who had once been patients. They all said the same thing in different ways. "Thank you for remembering." Weeks passed. The Met closed the West Wing for investigation, but the installation was never reopened. The official explanation called it an electrical malfunction, though those who were there knew better. Keanu and Sandra never attended another gala after that. Instead, they quietly funded a foundation in the girl's name. It wasn't glamorous and it wasn't loud. It helped children in forgotten hospitals, the kind of places where hope was often the only medicine left. One evening, months later, Keanu visited the hospital where it all began. It had been abandoned years ago. The corridors smelled of dust and time. He walked through the dark rooms until he reached the one with the window facing the rain. It looked smaller than he remembered. Quieter. He stood by the window for a long time, holding the same paper crane. Then he placed it on the windowsill and whispered, "You kept your promise too." As he turned to leave, a soft breeze moved through the room. The crane fluttered slightly. A faint laugh, gentle and childlike, seemed to echo from the corner. He smiled. Outside, the sky broke open with light, gold spilling across the clouds. For the first time in years, it felt like the world was breathing again. Somewhere far away, in an art museum still filled with whispers of that night, a small motion sensor flickered alive for no reason. The sculpture in the closed West Wing pulsed once, just a single heartbeat of light, and then went still forever. And on its base, a new inscription appeared that no one claimed to write, the promise kept. Keanu and Sandra never spoke publicly about the Met Gala again. But every year, on the same date, flowers appeared at the steps of the museum, white lilies and small paper cranes. No one knew who left them. But those who passed by said that on certain nights, when rain fell gently over New York, the reflection in the museum's glass showed 3 figures standing together. A man, a woman, and a little girl between them, smiling at the light.